Welcome to the Inside Elections podcast, where we analyze elections in a nonpartisan, data-driven, and accessible way. In this episode, we'll talk about the tension between Republicans on Capitol Hill and Donald Trump as the GOP tries to implement the president's agenda, and what impact tariffs and the economy could have on the midterm elections. And we'll discuss how much re-election really is on the minds of members on Capitol Hill. And we'll do it all with Laura Weiss of Punchbowl News. Buckle up. I'm Nathan Gonzales, editor and publisher of Inside Elections, the go-to place for nonpartisan analysis for more than 40 years. I spent most of last weekend hanging out with some college friends at a refused quicksand tour a show, and going back and forth between Idaho's 1st and 2nd districts, which are represented by Russ Fulcher and Mike Simpson.
I'm Jacob Rubashkin, deputy editor of Inside Elections, and I didn't go anywhere this past weekend, but this coming weekend, I will be headed out to Maryland's 8th congressional district to spend the first 2 nights of Passover with my family. That is, of course, the district represented by Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin.
Yeah, it was interesting in Idaho because I think we were, depending on the activity, we were bouncing back and forth because most of Boise is in the 2nd district, but kind of if there are Boise suburbs, Meridian, Nampa are in the 1st district. So I don't know. I decided to mention both.
and this is a good point, Nathan, because readers of Inside Elections already know this. Idaho is one of the fastest growing states in the nation. I think it grew 10% between the 2010 and 2020 census. And those Boise suburbs and the Ada County region in general is increasingly Democratic. And so Idaho right now is split between 2 very Republican districts. But what people may not know is that it actually has one of the more politically balanced redistricting commissions. And so if and when it gains a 3rd seat in the 2030 census, which I happen to think it will, that redistricting commission could very well draw a competitive Boise-based seat in Idaho, in Ada County, which is currently split between the 1st and 2nd districts. So something to keep an eye out for the 2032 House races is potentially some reporting trips out there, not just to go see musical tours, but the potential for a competitive House district in Idaho, something everyone should keep on their radar.
Well, and what you're talking about is interesting because refused is Swedish, and the singer from stage, he's like, "We're not liberals, we're revolutionaries," and there's like socialists basically, and he gave some of his political views, which would not be in alignment with a red state, but it might be in alignment with a growing blue community. So I'm, we're looking around like, is this going to start a riot? But everyone is, I don't know. I didn't do an exit poll at the show, but no one, the band, I think, left the venue unscathed, and everyone had a good time. But it was interesting because I'm sure probably the singer, thinks of Idaho as a red state and has not been diving into Ada County trends like you have.
Yeah, I will say Trump did a little bit better in Ada County this past year. He won it by 10 points. He only won it by 3 points in 2020. So maybe a little bit of snapback, but something to keep an eye out for, especially because that redistricting commission, if they can draw a competitive district, I think they will.
Well, I love it. We're looking ahead to 2026 and 2028, also 2032.
Well, we passed this week. We passed the midpoint date between the 2020 and 2030 census. So we're actually closer to the 2030 census than we were to 2020. So just saying, putting it out there.
Time flies. I'm still getting used to these new district numbers before we change the numbers again.
Yeah.
All right. Well, before we focus on what's going on Capitol Hill with Laura, let's do some headlines. Jacob, what should we make sure not miss?
In Texas, State Attorney General Ken Paxton officially jumped into the Senate race against incumbent John Cornyn, kicking off what could be an incredibly expensive and nasty Republican primary. Cornyn, in his statement welcoming Paxton to the race, immediately zeroed in on some alleged infidelity that surfaced during Paxton's impeachment trial last year. Cornyn in the past has suggested that Paxton belongs in prison, and the senior senator from Texas has promised to fight very hard for his seat. That said, the limited polling that we do have of this race so far indicates that Cornyn begins as an underdog against Paxton in a Republican primary.
Yeah, that's going to be a expensive and brutal race. In Michigan, Republican Congressman John James announced his run for governor, giving the GOP a top-tier candidate in what will be a very competitive race to replace Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer. Even though James will be risking leaving his 10th district seat behind and risk being in office, he just won that seat in 2022. His two previous unsuccessful runs for the United States Senate show that he's always had his eye on kind of bigger prizes.
And that 10th district race already getting crowded. Two Democrats just jumped in the last couple of days, Christina Hines and Tim Greimel. If those names sound familiar, it's because Inside Elections over a month ago, I believe was the first to report both of them were moving toward bids in the Democratic primary there.
Good work, Jacob.
In New Hampshire, Democrat Chris Pappas was the first candidate to jump into that Senate primary. The incumbent Jeanne Shaheen not running for re-election next year. Pappas currently represents half the state, but he may not have a clear shot at the nomination. His colleague Maggie Goodlander, who was just elected to the state's other district, is also making noises about running. On the Republican side, former Governor Chris Sununu, stop me if you've heard this one before, will not run for Senate in New Hampshire. This is the second time he's been heavily recruited by Republicans to run, and the second time he has passed up on a bid. That leaves former Massachusetts Senator Scott Brown as the highest profile potential candidate. Brown, of course, was the Republican nominee for Senate in Massachusetts in 2010, winning that special election, lost in 2012, and then in 2014 ran against Shaheen, losing a very narrow race, spotted on Capitol Hill in the last week or so, clearly looking at giving it another go in 2026.
Let's look ahead, and also Sununu, unlikely to run in 2032 as well.
But 2028 now, a very different question, maybe not for Senate.
There you go. And while Republicans now have a full conference on the Hill with 220 members after the two recent special elections in Florida, Democrats will be down 2 members until the September 23rd special election in Arizona's 7th district and the November 4th special election in Texas' 18th district. Both of those Democratic seats are vacant because of deaths of members.
Yeah, and we saw the impact that even those few number of vacancies can have this morning. We'll talk a lot more about the vote that the House took on the budget framework ahead of reconciliation. That vote passed 216 to 214. Had those 2 Democratic seats been filled, it would have failed. And that's trillions of dollars in spending and cuts in the balance.
Well, let's bring Laura in and let's talk about it. Special guest Laura Weiss of Punchbowl News. She's the tax and financial services reporter for Punchbowl, but also filling in with the theme of some previous guests. She is a CQ Roll Call alum, as well as the managing editor of the school paper at Dartmouth. So, Laura, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Before we jump into a lot of big news, what congressional district did you grow up in?
So I grew up in Pennsylvania 6th. Congresswoman Chrissy Villian represents it now. So from those Philly suburbs that are always very, very interesting in presidential elections, which is a lot of fun. That's always how I describe it to people. I'm from that area that you're just totally fixated on every 4 years. So yeah, that's around where I grew up.
And were you politically involved, engaged? Was your family political?
I wasn't too much. I was always doing journalism. I was actually like a student reporter back in middle school. So that was always kind of my angle on it. But it was really interesting and cool growing up there. And then like you mentioned, I went to college in New Hampshire. So I got to see primary in 2016 happening there. And that was really exciting. So it definitely got me the bug of wanting to be a reporter that covers all of this, covers politics, and getting to do it in the Capitol now is great. So very lucky.
Yeah, and we are obviously fans of CQ Roll Call and fans of former editors of school papers in college.
Even
Very
ones as creatively named as the Dartmouth.
Yeah, they could have probably done better, but I guess they were like straight news, right? They were like, that's it.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Yeah. So
don't overcomplicate it, right?
yeah, straight to the point.
Before we talk about what's going on Capitol Hill, tell people Punchbowl News. How did Punchbowl News? Where does that name come from?
Yeah, so it's the Secret Service nickname for the Capitol. And so what we do is we're entirely focused on the Capitol, and that's our world. And, we are here all the time and covering it closely. So that's where it comes from a few years ago when they launched.
And that is the reason why you are the perfect guest to put a timestamp on this. We are recording on Thursday at lunchtime, and the House has just passed. Maybe you could characterize it for us. They've just passed the framework for the budget. What did the House just do?
Yeah, basically that's it. They passed this budget resolution that lays out the instructions for this very complicated in the weeds process of reconciliation that Republicans want to use to pass this big tax bill and spending cut bill, and also some border security and Pentagon funding in there also. So this is really this initial first step. They ended up doing something that really gives them a lot more wiggle room in terms of what the final bill will look like than the House originally laid out about, I think it was over a month ago now. It's been longer than it feels in some ways, when the House first passed their version of the budget resolution, but it came back from the Senate with instructions that basically leave a lot of these decisions till later on how deep to cut spending and how big to go on tax cuts. And so now it's going to be playing out now for weeks, maybe months. We'll see.
Now, if we zoom out a little bit, it's been quite a week or even quite a few days with President Donald Trump implementing global tariffs, resulting in decline in the stock market, a lot of volatility, a lot of uncertainty, both in the country and around the world. He kind of dialed things back yesterday, but it's still not completely clear, right, where everything is settling. So I guess my question, Laura, is how are Republicans on the Hill handling the uncertainty, and what does that tension feel like between the confidence of the White House that everything is fine, but then these Republicans who are feeling maybe the pressure of the midterm elections coming up, next year? What does that feel like on the Hill?
Yeah, it's a really tough situation, frankly, for some of these Republicans to be in. And, on the whole, mostly Republicans have been sticking with Trump, willing to give him time, willing to give the president, some runway to see how he wanted to end this. And I think there's probably some relief privately, at least at this pause here. But there were, especially in the Senate, some Republicans, like Rand Paul has been a big vocal critic. He's obviously a lot more comfortable, breaking with Trump and things like that than you would see some Republicans being. But there's starting to be concerns about like the market needing to see clearer signs of where this was going. I was in the House Ways and Means Committee, which oversees trade, yesterday while the USTR, Jameson Greer, was testifying. Actually, he got the news during that hearing, which was a pretty awkward scenario for him. And Democrats really kind of hit on that he was in this hearing while this decision was being made. But, you started to hear some of those House Republicans saying, my farmers are worried. What would you say to my farmers who are worried about these tariffs? What would you say to the manufacturers in my district who are worried about these tariffs? People who are closer to, say, the Canadian border are talking about, we really need this trade. What would you say to people worried about it? So, they were kind of doing it in a way that didn't directly confront on their own what the president was doing, but it's clear there's anxiety, worry about reciprocal tariffs, the way those would hit agriculture and manufacturing, worried about the market chaos and what this could do to prices. And so, I think there's been a willingness to give Trump a little patience, but also you're starting to see a lot of those until this decision was made, like, okay, what's the end game? Let's just talk about where we're going. I'm wanting to see a clear message. And so this, I think, calmed some nerves, at least for the time being. But like you said, it's not over yet.
As you talk to members, and especially Republican members, about the economic situation in the last couple of days, what are they paying most close attention to? What is their barometer? Because I remember in '08, there was that incredible moment where the House voted down the bailout bill and the market dropped 9 points that day, and they came back and they voted for it. And the markets dropped more than that as the tariffs have come into effect, and then obviously the bounce back. So clearly the market is not kind of the immediate motivator that it was a decade and a half ago. What are the concerns here for House Republicans? Is it the market? Is it, like you said, the farmers in their districts? What are they actually paying attention to?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think seeing back where the markets were going, and especially how sensitive in recent days the markets have been to some of this tariff news. Is there a pause? Isn't there a pause? Like seeing fluctuations off of tweets that turned out to not be true yet, things like that. I think that's worrying, and I think you do see some Senate Republicans, especially reflecting that. But at the same time, I think the warnings of a recession, as that gets more intense, is where you start to see things ramp up. But I think it's just so hard for them politically to be in this position because it's very difficult, obviously, to criticize or break with the president right now as a Republican. You're stuck between a rock and a hard place. But at the same time, I think the sigh of relief for members of Congress is they don't have to take that vote. They may have to answer for it. It's their party, it's their president, and that's really difficult. But, they are not taking that vote themselves. And you can see how politically fraught that is with what the House has done this week, where they basically use this process of putting language in a rule to turn off the ability to force a vote to the floor on a resolution that would end the national emergency, that would basically go after and try to get rid of these big tariffs that Trump had put in place on April 2nd. And so seeing that the House Republican leadership is that worried about basically taking that vote, I think says a lot about where they'd be worried it would go. It's really hard with a lot of their political constituencies and just the messaging.
How many members of the Republican Party would you say are true believers in tariffs as an effective economic policy versus members who are willing or feel obligated to go along with the Trump administration policy because Trump is the leader of the party, he's the president, and what he says goes?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know, I don't have a quantifiable number in my head, but you're definitely starting to see that divide. I mean, you have someone like the Ways and Means Chairman Jason Smith, who's always been more aligned with Trump on trade, and he ended up winning the Ways and Means race a few years ago to jump some spots and chair the committee. And then on the other side, you have someone like Senator John Thune leading the Senate, where, he's from a really heavy agricultural state. This is not something that he's been comfortable with in the past. And so it's definitely a divide you see from members who are happy to go out there and tout this. And, there absolutely are those Republicans in Congress who the market might falter, but they're with Trump. They believe they're totally in line with these plans and the long-term vision of these big trade wars to goal of, reordering the global trade system and making a big change. They see that vision, but there are a lot of free traders still. that's not over. I mean, even on Ways and Means, the Committee Overseeing Trade, you have the Trade Subcommittee Chair who will say frequently he doesn't like tariffs. He understands they're a tool. He'll see, but that's Adrian Smith from Nebraska. So again, big agricultural state.
And to what extent, and maybe part of your answer to this question was just in your last answer, do you feel Republicans looking ahead and saying, our majorities might be in peril, or are they still living in, I'll say, the past of, we just won the 2024 elections, voters sent us here to do a job, to implement the president's agenda? Where do you feel like Republicans are sitting right now?
I think part of it is that in their vision, there's so much more to come in the economic agenda, right? Like they want to do tax cuts and they want to do this big tax cut bill. And so, they see a lot more happening between now and political season. So I think that is probably encouraging. And also, it's not really sure where the tariffs will be and where the trade war will be at 6 months from now. And that's a lot closer to, when they're starting to get worried about the midterms. So I think it is early. And a big piece of this as well is that they're looking at doing other things in the economic policy space that they really believe on and that they ran on and believe that help Trump win in terms of some of his tax cut promises. And so I think that's a piece of it, is that there's just so much time to go.
The Trump administration has been floating some trial balloons about raising taxes on the highest earners. Is there any chance that House Republicans, Senate Republicans go along with that? Or is that a Rubicon that they're not willing to cross, even if Trump were to, actually come out and put some political heft behind it?
Yeah. So that would be a break with kind of the Republican orthodoxy, right? And so on taxes and like where they've been as a party for a long time. And so it would be a big twist if they went with something like that. I mean, I think if it was going to come from the White House and it was not something that Republicans want to do here, which is what my expectation would be, you'd have to see that probably, I would think, coming from Trump for it to really catch fire and be like, all right, we're going to do it for him. But I believe my coworker, Jake Sherman, he has asked the House Republican leadership about this, and they all gave quotes that were like, no, we're not raising taxes. And I know whenever you ask Senator Crapo, the Finance Committee chair, about raising taxes, his response is kind of, that's not what I'm about, even when it is sometimes like a little more palatable for Republicans. It's just overall is philosophically not what he wants to do. So, I think with Trump in the White House, nothing is out of a question till it's out of a question. And this reconciliation process is clearly going to be really difficult. And you're going to see all of this deficit pressure. So can't rule anything out. But that would definitely be a huge shift. But I think what you're seeing in some of those reports is this idea where I think there is a little bit of concern about essentially the Democratic messaging, which has been, some of these tax cuts do go to very wealthy people and that Republicans want to extend. And then they're looking at spending cuts on programs like Medicaid and SNAP. And so I do think some of that coming out is also a win for Democrats and where they've been on their messaging so far, which has been, I think, some early signs that it's going well.
Yeah, well, what is how else do you see Democrats handling the current, being in the minority, not really having a clear leader? I mean, they have leaders on the Hill, but they're not in the majority. They don't have the speaker. Because there is the sense, Democrat polling that shows the Democratic Party is unpopular. There's no clear leader overall of the party. How do you think Democrats on the Hill are handling the current economic uncertainty and Trump and tariffs?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been tricky this year. It's obviously hard for any party to come out of a big election loss like we saw in November. And so there's been some soul searching. There's been some serious, back and forth and concern. I mean, and I think it was all exemplified when you saw Senator Schumer with the CR and him just getting hammered by the Democratic base for giving members some cover and moving forward with that. And a lot of that has tamped down and quieted down now. But I think it just shows the tension Democrats are facing between wanting to really fight Trump and go after Trump and wanting to handle the sort of resistance to what Republicans are doing in a more tamped down way. And I think those are internal conversations. They're things they're still working through. But I think on the tariffs, in terms of politics, obviously they very much oppose them as a policy, but kind of a political gift so far to Democrats in a way, because, the big message I think Democrats took coming out of that election was we have to win on the economy. If people just don't feel good about the economy, we won't win. That was one of the big messages. And so people are not going to feel good if prices go up. Markets are chaotic. Like, those are not things that feel good. And so you see Democrats are really hammering the tariff messaging, and they're really, really going strong on that. And I think view that as like their angle back into winning the economic messaging.
Yeah, it'll really be interesting. I was talking to a Republican strategist. I'll say a real one who actually works on races, not some on TV that I'm not really sure what they do, but who was talking about Republicans are going to still run as outsiders, right? Even though that sounds strange because they have the White House, they have the Senate, they have the House, they're going to still run as outsiders and hope that Democrats are going to be looked at as defending government, defending institutions, defending things that aren't popular, and we'll see how much Republicans, that strategy is going to be effective when they are in control of government and these institutions. But it was just an interesting look to the future. Let me ask you about kind of zooming out even more. One of the criticisms I hear about Capitol Hill and politicians, members on the Hill, is that they just want to win re-election. They're just so focused on winning re-election. And I think they want to win, but how much do you see those re-election efforts in their daily schedules, right? I mean, you're on the Hill and in the Capitol, but how much do you see them focusing on that re-election mentally, or with going to fundraisers, doing call time, whatever it might be?
Yeah, it's definitely a big part of their lives. I mean, I think especially the House running for re-election every 2 years is really different than the position the Senate's in. And you can feel that, I think, sometimes tangibly in the House, like how much more there are those anxieties about re-election so much sooner, because you basically win your re-election and you're right back into your campaign season almost. It's a really quick turnaround. And so the system just kind of sets it up that way to a pretty significant extent. You already have to start thinking about it. And so I think that's like a lot more present in the House, whereas senators kind of have the ability to take a few years and then be like, oh, I should now is starting to get toward reelection after a few years of their term. So it's definitely something you feel, but it's not. There's lots of deep policy focus around as well. It definitely differs person to person, and what people's roles are like within their party and within the chamber. But yeah, it is always kind of ever present to an extent.
And do you think that Republicans are operating the way they are, at least to some degree, because they fear or believe that they're going to lose control of the House next cycle? How common or prevalent is that belief, and how much is that motivating not just members thinking about their own individual races, but thinking about the short window of opportunity that they have with a trifecta before a midterm might, throw up some obstacles?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think anytime that a new administration comes in and you have a trifecta, you have to move quickly and you have to do as much as humanly possible, because history shows that it's pretty often that a president loses the House in the midterms. And so if you have an agenda, you got to move really quickly. And I think that's why you saw House Republicans this time around what felt like kind of optimistically, I think like last summer when they were preparing, getting ready for reconciliation if it happened. And it was always a possibility, but it wasn't always, I think, viewed as the most likely one. And then when they pulled it off, they wanted to move quickly. There was talk of passing a tax bill in 100 days, which is a timeline that is kind of unfathomably fast for a very, very complicated policy bill. So it's not happening in 100 days. That ship has sailed, but they're still trying to move very quickly. I think for those reasons. They're also kind of in a unique situation right now with Trump's agenda because so much of it is tax cuts. So much of it is tax cuts that expire at the end of the year. And so they're nowhere close to this. It's not something that's looking like it's going to happen in any way right now. But, if they got to December 31st, you're going over a cliff where people's taxes go up. And that's just really politically a disaster for Republicans. They promised to they ran on tax cuts. Trump talked about cutting taxes for all kinds of people on the campaign trail. So you just can't do that. And they're very aware, I think, of that political reality as well. So I think there was a lot of factors keeping the pace up here. And even just, coming in, kind of having this trifecta that they weren't going into this election sure they were going to have. Also wanting to show people, okay, you elected Trump, here's what we can deliver. So I think that's also part of the pressure to move quickly is just to make that case, make that statement early on.
And what happens next? I mean, we've already seen kind of two nail biter House votes on frameworks, essentially, right? Not actual kind of legislation, but kind of steps along the process. I know, your colleague Jake often says like, this is the easy part of reconciliation, right? So like,
yeah,
if this is the easy part, what is the hard part, and when can we expect subsequent developments, and ultimately, when do Republicans want to have, realistically, not that 100 days, when do they want to have something the president can sign into law?
Yeah, so the House has set a very ambitious goal of Memorial Day. That would be the idea of a bill by Memorial Day, especially when the House already left, Senate's about to leave for a 2-week recess. That am very ambitious. Let's put it that way. That would be kind of a miracle. But, I think the idea here is for them to keep the pressure up to make something happen. If it happens in the summer, that's still a pretty good result for them, given how much this bill is going to span. But it's going to be really difficult. Basically, what they decided with the budget resolution that they adopted was it's too hard to agree to how much spending cuts we're going to do. It's too hard to specify a number that basically indicates Medicaid cuts. It's just too difficult. And we're not even agreeing right now to what the tax bill's confines are going to be. We'll figure it all out later. So that means later is going to be brutal. And, it sets the House and Senate up on somewhat of a collision course, potentially, unless they really work together ahead. But their members have competing needs. And even just in the House, I mean, we saw Speaker Johnson today coming out of this vote. We saw some of these House Freedom Caucus members and other conservatives that were holding out their support for the budget resolution, saying he committed to cut $1.5 trillion in spending. Senator Thune talked about it, and he may have not given an ironclad commitment, but that was progress from him of what we want to see. Saying that they got a commitment from Speaker Johnson to actually tie the amount of money they're going to spend on tax cuts to how much they're cutting in federal spending, which would get really tricky for tax to be tied to that, directly tied to that, and also potentially not the best look in the end if it's tied directly to things like Medicaid cuts. And then on the flip side, you have the speaker huddling on the House floor with a group of more centrist members who are really worried about Medicaid cuts back home and really worried about that, what that means from New York, New Jersey, Arizona, that all over. They came out and said, he committed to us, it's going to be what we want to see. And so clearly, those two groups, it's probably impossible. Maybe there's a way to do it, but it's going to be so hard to make them both happy. And, it's just going to be a very difficult effort in the end. We saw President Trump get somewhat involved this week in trying to move the budget resolution over the finish line. Would expect him to be much more involved when this is an actual bill, when this is his tax bill. But yeah, it's going to be a very interesting, probably weeks or months here in the Capitol.
Well, it must be frustrating for Republican leadership to try to go through these very complicated negotiations with all these members, and then one tweet from President Trump or from Elon Musk, and the whole thing is just turned on its head. And I guess we'll see if that happens. It's happened before. We'll see if it happens again. Laura, thank you. You've taken time. People could probably hear you're on the Hill right now. And so we really appreciate you taking the time away from your schedule and your reporting to join us. It's been fun.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
And people, you should follow Laura on Twitter/X at Laura E. Weiss 16, I believe.
Yep, that's right.
X,
yep.
and continue to read her stuff on Punchbowl. So thank you, Laura.
Thanks so much.
And now it's time for our final segment. Look what I found, where we bring up anything we've been into recently. Can be political. It's usually not. Jacob, is yours political?
Mine is not political this week, thankfully. I am really enjoying season 3 of the Amazon show Reacher, which is an adaptation of the Lee Child Jack Reacher series. It's so fun. It's a show about a man who is so large that there is nothing in the world that can stop him. And any challenge that comes his way, he is able to use his gigantic fists and training as a former military police officer and investigator to punch or slam or shoot his way out of it. It's kind of mindless, but it's incredibly enjoyable. And I am glad it's back for season 3. There are 26 books in the series, so I don't think they're ever going to run out of content for this particular show.
Is this the TV version of the Tom Cruise?
We don't talk about the Tom Cruise movies.
Okay.
You have to understand,
those aren't canon.
In the books, Lee Child describes Jack Reacher as a man whose hands are the size of dinner plates, whose fists are the size of frozen turkeys. Now, Tom Cruise,
5'4".
A lot you can say about him.
Know.
Yeah, he probably. Yeah, Tom Cruise is not a large man. He's quite small, quite famously. Alan Ritchson, who's the actor who plays Jack Reacher in the Amazon series. He people may know him from Blue Mountain State, which was a very different show from a decade ago, where he plays a college football player. But he's 6'2" or 6'3", and he is a big 6'3". So he looks the part in a way that Tom Cruise kind of stretched credulity when he played Jack Reacher.
Okay.
In those movies.
Well, it sounds like maybe the Seahawks should consider him for the offensive line. We could use like a guard. So anyway, what I found, I returned to the Baird Center in lovely Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the site of the Republican National Convention Media Filing Center. But this time I found Adepticon. Adepticon is a giant tabletop miniatures gaming convention. Warhammer is probably the game that most people have heard of that was being, that there was a tournament there. But my son was playing X-Wing, playing in the X-Wing World Championships. He went 3-2 on the qualifying day and just missed the cut for the second round, which is pretty good for an 11-year-old playing adults. But it was great. My son got to meet the creator of the X-Wing game who was there playing, and just the community in general has been so nice and so kind. But yeah, it was weird to go back to spaces where we were in a very different setting, for this. So anyway, that's
probably a slightly different crowd than at the RNC.
yes, but I would be interested in an exit poll for the people there because it's not particularly diverse from male, female, but there is the LGBTQ plus community. But you have people, I don't know, people from all over.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to see the politics of that group. I'm going to guess it's probably more right of center, but gaming and arts, there's kind of a different
Yeah.
kind of rebellious or there's a different streak there.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting, thesis there to be written. You could do some fun field work as a student going to those events and trying to get a gauge of the politics.
Yeah, it was fun. At Inside Elections, we provide nonpartisan analysis of congressional, presidential, and gubernatorial races. With a combination of reporting and data, we break down the key races and bring valuable context to complex elections. Please go to InsideElections.com to subscribe to the biweekly newsletter. We have individual subscriptions or group packages that are tailored for association and corporate PACs. If you like this episode, please subscribe to the podcast on all the platforms. If you're watching it on YouTube, please click the thumbs up and subscribe there as well. If you didn't like today's episode, please email Dennis Lexian. We also wanted to thank our producers, Alan Tazinski and Melissa Lenner of Pretty Easy Podcasts, and our associate producer, Conrad Tolosa. Please come back and join us again next time.